Millionaire kicks his pregnant daughter out of the house, but what he finds out 10 years later has left him in shock. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving exciting stories firsthand. The Williams mansion, located in one of Los Angeles' noblest neighborhoods, was as imposing and cold as the man who inhabited it. Richard Williams, a real estate tycoon, had built his fortune with iron hands and a heart of stone. For him, nothing was more important than his reputation and his family's impeccable image. Every detail of the Williams life was carefully calculated: grand parties, dinners with influential businessmen, and constant appearances in the social columns. At the center of this luxurious world was Amanda, their only daughter, who was always treated as a showpiece, a symbol of the perfect family that Richard so wanted to project. Amanda, however, didn't fit into this cold, controlled mold. From an early age, she had a sensitive, dreamy soul. She loved music, flowers, and sunny afternoons in the park. While Richard made plans for his daughter to marry some rich heir and follow in the family's elitist footsteps, Amanda was enchanted by the simplicity of life and the people she met outside that world of empty luxury. That's how she met Daniel Carter. He worked as a mechanic in a small workshop in the city center. Daniel didn't have wealth, but he had something that Amanda had never really experienced: sincere affection and genuine love. Whenever she could, Amanda would run away from the mansion to meet Daniel in the workshop, where he would greet her with a smile and hands still smeared with grease. There, sitting on a toolbox, Amanda felt that she could breathe, that she could be who she really was. Months passed, and their love blossomed in secret. But fate, always merciless, had a storm in store for Amanda. One afternoon, while watching Daniel work on a car, she felt dizzy and nauseous. The dizziness became frequent, and a few days later, a test confirmed what Amanda had feared. She was pregnant. Her heart raced. She knew that her father would never accept this news. Not only did Richard despise humble people like Daniel, but he also had an explosive temper. However, Amanda decided that she would stand up to her father. She believed that somehow the love of father and daughter would speak louder. That evening, Amanda arrived home feeling her stomach turn, and it wasn't just because of her pregnancy. The mansion was silent, except for the faint sound of the marble clock on the wall. Richard was in his office, as usual, reviewing contracts and analyzing figures. He didn't even look up when Amanda entered the room. "What now?" he asked without patience, leafing through papers. Amanda took a deep breath, feeling her heart beat fast. "Dad, I need to talk to you. It's important." Richard raised his eyes slowly, frowning. "I'm busy, Amanda. It can wait." "It can't." Her voice shook. "It's serious." Something in her daughter's expression caught his attention. Richard put down the papers and leaned back in the leather chair, crossing his arms. "Just say it. I'm pregnant." For a second, time seemed to stop. Richard's face remained still, as if he were processing every word. Then his eyes narrowed and the apparent calm shattered into a furious outburst. "What?" His voice echoed through the house. "Pregnant? Pregnant with whom?" Amanda struggled to remain calm. "Daniel Carter." Just then, Evelyn Williams, Amanda's mother, appeared at the office door. She was holding a cup of tea in her hands, but when she heard those words, the fine china slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. "Amanda," murmured Evelyn, her voice almost inaudible. Richard stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back so hard that it almost toppled over. "That filthy mechanic who fixes our cars?" He spat the words with contempt. "I warned you, Amanda. I warned you to stay away from that guy." "I love Daniel," Amanda retorted, with tears in her eyes. "And this baby is the fruit of that love." "Love?" Richard laughed, but his laugh was cruel. "That's not love, that's shame." Evelyn, seeing the direction the conversation was taking, tried to intervene. "Richard, please?" she asked, approaching her husband. "She's our daughter, don't do this." "Stay out of this, Evelyn," shouted Richard, making his wife cringe. "Don't you dare defend that. That irresponsible woman. Don't talk to her like that," Evelyn begged, tears forming in her eyes. "She needs us now." "She's made her choice," Richard shouted. "She chose this mechanic. Let her keep him." "Dad, please, I need you," Amanda pleaded, her voice breaking. "You don't need me. You need that fifth-rate mechanic. Now get out of my house and don't ever come back." "Richard," cried Evelyn, clutching her husband's arm. "She's pregnant. Then let her go and have that baby far away from here. That child is not my grandchild." Amanda was paralyzed, unable to believe that she was hearing those words from her own father. Evelyn ran to her daughter and hugged her, desperate. "Don't go, my child," sobbed Evelyn, holding Amanda by the shoulders. I can convince your father. It'll pass. He just needs time." "He won't change, Mom," replied Amanda, her voice weak. "He never changes." Evelyn hugged her tighter, as if trying to protect her from the cruel world that awaited her outside. "I can't go with you," murmured Evelyn, crying. "I can't." "I know," Amanda replied, feeling her heart break. With tears in her eyes and a suitcase in her hands, Amanda went downstairs for the last time. Evelyn accompanied her to the door, and before her daughter crossed the threshold, held her hands tightly. "I love you," whispered Evelyn, her voice breaking. "No matter what happens, you'll always be my daughter." Amanda just nodded, unable to speak. When she walked through the door and felt the cold night air touch her face, she knew that her life would never be the same. Inside, Evelyn was crying quietly, sitting on the stairs while Richard remained in his office, cold and impassive, as if he had just crossed his own daughter's name out of his life. Darkness overtook the streets of Los Angeles as Amanda, with a small suitcase in her hands and a broken heart, walked aimlessly. The cold wind cut across her face, and, with each step, the feeling of emptiness in her chest grew. She could still feel the echo of her father's voice shouting, the cruel words that had broken everything she knew as home. She tried to hold back the tears, but she couldn't. The tears flowed freely down her face as she asked herself, "What now? Where do I go?" The answer seemed obvious. Daniel. He was all Amanda had right now. She needed to see him. She needed him to say that everything would be all right. It took more than an hour to get to the garage where Daniel worked. When she arrived, the garage was closed, but Amanda knew where he lived, a small apartment above the workshop itself. With trembling hands, she knocked on the weathered wooden door. "Daniel." "It's me," she called, her voice breaking. The seconds dragged by like an eternity until hesitant footsteps echoed inside. The door finally opened, revealing Daniel, with a tired face marked by dark circles under his eyes. "Amanda," he murmured, surprised to see her there. "I have nowhere to go. My father threw me out when I told him about the baby," she said, and her voice broke for good. Instinctively, Amanda tried to hug him, but felt his body stiffen. Daniel grabbed her arms and gently pulled her away. "Amandina, he stammered, avoiding looking her in the eye. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Daniel, please." "I can't," he mumbled, as if the words were burning his throat. "I can't help you now." Amanda felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What do you mean? I thought—" "I haven't told my family yet," Daniel confessed, finally looking at her. "They won't understand. They'll kick me out too. My father always says that here at home. But you said we'd be together. You promised." "I know." Daniel lowered his head, ashamed. "But I'm scared, Amanda. I don't know what to do." Those words hurt more than any insult Richard had ever thrown at him. "So that's it?" she said, her voice shaking. "You're abandoning me?" Daniel didn't answer. "Say something," Amanda begged, the tears already falling uncontrollably. "I just need time," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. "Time?" Amanda laughed bitterly. "I don't have time, Daniel. I'm pregnant. And I don't have anyone." Daniel took a step back and bowed his head. "I'm sorry." The door closed in her face. Amanda remained still for a few seconds, unable to move. The words "I'm sorry" echoed in her mind like a hammer. She put her hand to her stomach, feeling a suffocating pain in her chest. "I promise I'll take care of you," she whispered, her eyes watering, talking to the baby growing inside her. "Somehow, I'll manage." The next few hours were a blur of despair. Amanda walked the streets, weaker and weaker, more and more desperate. She tried to find some shelter, somewhere to hide from the bitter cold that punished the city that night. But every door she knocked on was closed. Every face she crossed looked away, as if she were invisible. Hunger began to take hold. The last meal she had eaten had been a snack at lunch, still at her parents' house. Now her stomach rumbled painfully. She went into a snack bar and ordered a glass of water, the only thing she could afford. Sitting in the corner of the store, she saw a couple sharing a hot meal and tears began to flow. Hours passed and dawn came. Amanda, now exhausted and freezing, found an alleyway sheltered from the wind and curled up on the floor, hugging her suitcase as if it could bring her some comfort. She closed her eyes, trying to shake off the fear, but her body was shaking and her thoughts were dark. What if I don't make it? What if my baby is born on the street? What if I don't have the strength to go on? It was at that moment, when all seemed lost, that a soft, gentle voice broke the silence. "Miss, what are you doing here?" Amanda looked up and saw a lady with grey hair and kind eyes. Her weathered face conveyed a serenity that Amanda hadn't seen for a long time. Amanda tried to speak, but her voice failed her. "Come with me, dear," said the woman, holding out her hand. Amanda hesitated. What if it was a mistake? What if that woman couldn't be trusted? "Come, you can't stay here." That voice was so sweet, so motherly that Amanda couldn't refuse. With what little strength she had left, she took the old woman's hand and helped her up. "My name is Margaret," said the woman, "and you're going to be fine." Margaret took Amanda to her small house, a modest wooden building in a simple but welcoming neighborhood. The place was small, with antique furniture and floral fabrics covering the sofas and curtains. The smell of hot tea and homemade bread filled the air. "You must be starving," said Margaret, placing a plate of hot soup in front of Amanda. Amanda, with tears in her eyes, picked up the spoon and began to eat. Each sip seemed to breathe a little life back into her body. "I don't know how to thank you," murmured Amanda, her voice weak. "No need to thank me, dear," replied Margaret with a soft smile. "God puts the right people in our path when we need them most." That night, even after being abandoned by the one she loved the most, Amanda slept in a warm, soft bed. Margaret left the bedroom door ajar and stood there, watching the young woman sleep, worried and silent. She knew that Amanda would still face difficult times. She knew that the burden this young woman carried was too heavy for her fragile shoulders. But deep down in her heart, Margaret was determined. She would not allow Amanda to face this battle alone. When Amanda woke up the next morning, she found Margaret preparing breakfast. "You're very kind," said Amanda, touched. "I'm just saying something back," replied Margaret. "One day, I needed someone too, and a good person came along." Margaret took Amanda's hands and squeezed them firmly. "I don't know what your journey will be like, my dear," she said, her eyes watering, "but I promise you one thing, you won't face it alone." Amanda closed her eyes and let the tears fall. For the first time, she felt that there was still hope. Amanda told her story to Margaret, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of warm tea between her hands. The elderly woman listened carefully to every detail, her eyes full of compassion. When Amanda had finished, Margaret held her hands and said, "You're strong, dear, stronger than you know." Those words stuck in Amanda's mind, and over the following months became a source of strength. Winter arrived in Los Angeles, bringing even colder nights and cloudy days that seemed to reflect the silent pain Amanda carried in her chest. The young woman had adapted to the routine in Margaret's simple home, a woman who, although she didn't have much, offered what Amanda needed most at that moment, warmth and sincere affection. But as safe as she was under Margaret's roof, Amanda knew that life was not going to be easy. Her belly was growing bigger every day, and with it her worries about the future. She still didn't know how she would support her son, or how she would manage to raise him without the support of her family. There was only one person who tried to help her, albeit from a distance: her mother, Evelyn. Unbeknownst to Richard, Evelyn managed to hide some small amounts of money and would hand them over to an acquaintance who, in turn, would discreetly leave an envelope in Margaret's hands. "It's not much, but it's what I can send," said Evelyn whenever she managed to send some help. Amanda knew that her mother risked a lot to do this. Richard, paranoid and cruel as ever, kept a close eye on Evelyn. He wanted to ensure that his wife had no contact with the daughter he had disowned. "Your mother loves you very much," Margaret would say every time she handed Amanda the envelope. "And one day, God will put things right." As much as Evelyn tried to help, the money wasn't enough to support Amanda and cover Margaret's household expenses. They both had to learn to live with little. Many nights Amanda would go to sleep feeling hungry, and on other nights Margaret would say that she didn't have an appetite, so that Amanda could eat a little more. As if all this wasn't enough, Amanda still had to deal with the open wound that Daniel had left. For weeks she waited for him to come to her, to say that he was sorry, that he wanted to help her, but that never happened. One cloudy afternoon, Amanda, her belly already protruding, plucked up courage and went to the workshop where Daniel worked. Her heart racing, she stopped on the sidewalk across the street and waited for him to come out. When Daniel finally appeared, his gaze met hers, and he turned his face away as if he hadn't seen her. Amanda was paralyzed. He had ignored her, as if she didn't exist, as if she had never existed. The pain was so intense that Amanda had to lean on a post to keep from falling. The tears came hard, and she returned home feeling that something inside her had broken for good. A few days later, she heard from acquaintances that Daniel was dating another girl, a beautiful, well-dressed young woman who used to pick him up from the garage in a luxury car. Amanda had no more doubts. He had moved on, and she needed to do the same. With a heavy heart and a tired soul, Amanda promised herself that she would never try to look for him again. Daniel was dead to her. Months passed, and Amanda continued to struggle to hold herself together. Her belly grew bigger, and with it grew fear. Fear of not being able to cope, of not being enough for the child that would come into the world, depending on her alone. The night the pain started, Margaret was out helping a sick neighbor. Amanda was alone at home when she felt the strong contractions and knew that her baby was coming. Frightened and overcome with pain, she tried to get up, but her legs were shaking so badly that she fell to the floor. She shouted Margaret's name, but knew no one would hear. In the darkness, Amanda dragged herself to the door, but a new contraction made her scream and curl up on the living room floor. In a cold sweat, with tears streaming down her face, she thought she wouldn't make it. "I can't," she mumbled, her face covered in sweat. It was then that she felt a strength welling up inside her. She remembered what Margaret had always said. "You are strong, stronger than you know. You're going to be born," she murmured, putting her hand to her belly. "And I'll take care of you, I promise." A few minutes later, Margaret arrived and found Amanda lying on the floor. Without wasting any time, she called an ambulance, which arrived in a hurry to take them to hospital. That morning, after hours of suffering, Amanda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, the tears came hard. He was so small, so fragile. "Hi, my love," whispered Amanda, kissing her son's forehead. "I'm Mommy, and I'm going to take care of you." Margaret, overcome with emotion, entered the room and approached. "What are we going to call him?" Amanda looked at the baby who was sleeping peacefully in her arms and smiled for the first time in a long time. "Lucas. He's going to be called Lucas." "It's a strong name," said Margaret, smiling, "and he'll need to be strong, just like his mother." The first few months were difficult. With no money to buy new clothes for the baby, Amanda and Margaret improvised, sewing clothes from old fabrics. Amanda spent sleepless nights soothing Lucas as he cried with colic, and spent her days trying to find a way to support her son. Then Margaret had an idea. "Amanda, you cook so well," she said one morning. "What if we started selling cakes and sweets?" Amanda hesitated. "Do you think anyone will buy?" "I think it's worth a try. We could use the money we were going to buy diapers for and get started." The two spent a whole evening in the kitchen, mixing doughs and preparing toppings. The next day, Amanda went out into the streets offering the cakes to neighbors and local shopkeepers. At first, she only sold a few, but little by little, Amanda and Margaret's homemade taste and dedication began to win people over. Before long, residents of the neighborhood were knocking on Margaret's door asking for orders. The recipes Margaret taught her, full of secrets and special spices, became the basis of the small business. And so, day after day, Amanda found new strength within herself. With every cake sold, with every smile Lucas gave her, she was more certain that she would succeed. Amanda still missed her mother. Evelyn couldn't go to meet her grandson because Richard found out about the help she was sending and forbade any contact. For months, Evelyn lived in torment, torn between her love for her daughter and her fear of her ruthless husband. But Amanda wouldn't give up. She knew that somehow one day she would be able to see her mother again. For now, only one thing mattered: protecting Lucas. And for his sake, Amanda was willing to face whatever it took. The years that passed were hard on Amanda, but they also shaped her into a stronger, more resilient woman who was determined not to bend in the face of difficulties. Over the course of a decade, she learned to face life with courage and to carry the weight of the responsibility of being a mother on her own. Lucas grew up healthy and happy, But Amanda knew that none of it was easy. In the beginning, money was still tight. She and Margaret often had to ration their meals so that Lucas always had the best they could offer. Amanda spent sleepless nights preparing pasta and icing, while during the day she went door to door offering her cakes and sweets. Little by little, her determination began to pay off. Over time, Amanda began to receive more and more orders. There were days when she barely had time to rest, with customers arriving all the time at the modest house where she lived. But the real challenge wasn't just the hard work, it was living with the emptiness that still plagued her. Daniel had disappeared from her life like a ghost, and her father, well, Richard remained like a cruel shadow in the past. Amanda knew almost nothing about him since she had been thrown out of the house. On the other hand, Evelyn, her mother, kept in touch whenever she could. Fear, however, limited Evelyn. When she did manage to visit Amanda twice and meet Lucas, it was in quick meetings, on the sly. Amanda remembered her mother's pained look whenever they said goodbye, a look that mixed pride and pain. Evelyn loved her daughter and grandson, but living under Richard's constant surveillance made her fear every step she took. "I want to come more often," Evelyn once said with tears in her eyes. "But your father, he's always suspicious." Amanda held her mother's hands tightly. "Don't worry, Mum. Just knowing that you're thinking of me gives me strength." Even though her heart was tight, Amanda knew that Evelyn was also trapped in an invisible prison, a prison of fear and silence. It was this pain that Amanda channeled into her greatest achievement. Determined to give Lucas a better life, Amanda decided that she could no longer limit her business to the kitchen at home. She wanted something bigger. With the few savings she had gathered, plus Margaret's help, Amanda rented a small business on a busy corner of the neighborhood. The place was modest, but it had a special charm. She painted the walls in soft colors and hung floral curtains that recalled the coziness of Margaret's home. She put a sign in the window that read "Sweet Dreams Bakery," as a tribute to the dreams she had fought so hard to keep alive. On the day of the opening, Amanda felt a chill in her stomach. What if no one showed up? What if all that effort was in vain? But then, first thing in the morning, the first customers started arriving. Some were old neighbors who already knew her cakes. Others were curious onlookers attracted by the sweet scent spreading through the street. Margaret, always wise, stood behind the counter smiling and encouraging Amanda. "You did it, my dear," and she said, "I always knew you could do it." As the months went by, Sweet Dreams Bakery became a real success. People didn't just come for the sweets, they came for the welcoming energy that Amanda and Margaret transmitted. The place became a meeting place for families, friends, and even couples in love. Amanda was proud to see how that small business not only provided her with a decent living, but also allowed her to ensure a happy childhood for Lucas. Lucas, that child, who had been rejected by his own grandfather and father, grew up to be an extraordinary boy. At just 10 years old, he was polite, kind, and full of dreams. He loved helping his mother in the bakery, serving customers, and learning how to prepare dough and toppings. "Mom, one day I want to make the best cake ever," he would say, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I have no doubt that you'll succeed," Amanda replied, kissing his forehead. Lucas didn't know the full story of their past. Amanda never had the courage to tell him about Richard or Daniel. For him, Margaret was like a grandmother, and Evelyn, well, Lucas knew that Evelyn was his real grandmother, but he understood that there was something complicated about the relationship. However, Amanda couldn't hide some difficult truths from him. Once, when Lucas was 7, he asked why he didn't have a father. "He left before you were born," Amanda replied, trying to hide the pain she still held in her chest. Lucas, with the innocence that only a child has, just hugged Amanda and said, "It's okay. You're all I need." Those words were like a balm to Amanda. She knew that this boy was her greatest gift, and that she would do anything to protect him from the suffering she herself had come to know so well. But no matter how hard Amanda tried to move on, her past still haunted her. There were nights when she woke up in a cold sweat, remembering Richard's words echoing in her mind, "You're not my daughter anymore." At other times she imagined Daniel on the street, living an ordinary, perhaps happy life. As if she and Lucas had never existed for him. There was pain, yes, but there was also an unshakable certainty inside Amanda. She would not allow that pain to define her. Now, with Sweet Dreams Bakery growing and Lucas becoming a boy full of life and joy, Amanda felt that she had won many battles. However, fate never forgets those who try to escape it. And Amanda, without knowing it, was about to see ghosts from the past return to shake everything she had built with so much sacrifice. The years had not been kind to Richard Williams. The man who had once boasted of being a powerful, respected and feared real estate tycoon now spent his nights locked in his office, lost in bitter thoughts. The arrogant glint that had always lit up his eyes had disappeared, replaced by a deep weariness and an empty stare. Since throwing Amanda out of the house, Richard had never been the same. He convinced himself that he had done the right thing. After all, he couldn't allow the Williams' reputation to be tarnished. But as much as he tried to hide it, there was a silent wound that bled every day. Evelyn, his wife, had become a faded woman, always downcast, always distant. The laughter that used to echo through the mansion had disappeared. And now her problems went far beyond the silence that dominated their home. The company that Richard had taken years to build was slowly sinking. Victor Reynolds, his business partner and former friend, was gaining ground and power within the business. Little by little, Victor manipulated agreements, sabotaged contracts and embezzled funds, until Richard realized that a large part of his fortune had evaporated before his eyes. "You trusted the wrong people too much," said Evelyn one evening, her voice breaking. Richard snorted bitterly. "You always find a way to blame me, don't you?" "I'm not blaming you," she replied tiredly. "I just think you should have worried more about your family and less about your image." Richard gave her a hard stare. "If you've come to talk about Amanda, you can forget it. She's made her choice and is no longer part of our lives." Evelyn lowered her eyes, unable to hold back the tears. "It was your choice. And yours alone." That night, Richard hardly slept. Amanda's name echoed in his mind like a ghost he had tried to ignore for years. He remembered the pleading look on his daughter's face, the tears that ran down her cheeks when he pointed to the door and threw her out. But he pushed those memories away and clung to his pride, the same pride that was slowly destroying him. The next morning, Richard decided to go for a walk. He walked aimlessly through the streets of Los Angeles, trying to dispel the suffocating feeling of failure that haunted him. Memories of the glory he had lost hammered at the back of his mind. He was no longer the powerful man he had once been. Without realizing it, his footsteps led him to a corner where there was a small patisserie. The delicately decorated facade was eye-catching. The name Sweet Dreams Bakery was written in delicate letters above the door. Through the window, Richard saw customers chatting, smiling and tasting cakes and pastries that looked irresistible. Curious and attracted by the aroma that escaped through the gaps in the door, Richard entered. The bell above the entrance tinkled softly, and he was greeted by a cozy, almost familiar atmosphere. The tables had flowered tablecloths, and there were vases with small flowers delicately positioned on each one. The walls had pictures of happy moments, children smiling, families together, satisfied customers. There was a warmth in the place that Richard hadn't felt for a long time. Then a brown-haired, bright-eyed boy appeared from behind the counter. He didn't look a day over 10, but there was something about him that immediately caught Richard's attention. "Good morning, sir," said the boy with a broad smile. "Welcome to Sweet Dreams Bakery." Richard, surprised by the boy's politeness, returned the smile, feeling strangely at ease. "Thanks, kid," he said. "You seem to know how to welcome customers." "I like to help my mother," explained the boy, straightening his apron. "She says it's important to treat everyone with respect." That sentence hit Richard like an arrow. "It's a good lesson," he muttered, trying to hide his discomfort. "Do you know what you want?" asked the boy anxiously. Richard looked at the display cases and pointed to a slice of chocolate cake covered in glossy syrup and a hint of red fruit. "That looks good. I'll take that one." The boy carefully took the slice, placed it on a delicate plate, and brought it to the table where Richard sat down. "Here you are, sir." Richard took a large note out of his wallet and held it out to the boy. "You can keep the change," he said, almost contemptuously, as if he was used to settling everything with money. But to his surprise, the boy shook his head and pushed the note back. "You don't have to, sir," he said firmly. "My mother always says that we shouldn't accept money that hasn't been earned through hard work." Richard remained motionless, staring at the boy with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. "And who is your mother, boy?" he asked, feeling an unsettling curiosity growing inside him. The boy smiled proudly. "She owns the place." "I'll call her over so you can meet her." Before Richard could reply, the boy ran to the back of the bakery. Something inside him began to stir. There was something about that boy, something that seemed all too familiar. It was then that Amanda appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had a tray in her hands and a gentle smile on her lips. But when her eyes met Richard's, her body froze. The smile disappeared, and the tray almost fell out of her hands. Richard was paralyzed. He felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Amanda stood before him, more mature, stronger, but still his daughter. The daughter he had thrown out of the house as if she were a stranger. Her eyes fixed on him, and Richard saw a mixture of surprise, anger, and pain. Amanda opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just grabbed Lucas's arm and pulled him behind the counter as if trying to protect him. "Let's go, son," she murmured. "Mom, he wanted to meet you," said Lucas, confused. "You don't have to," said Amanda in a firm tone. "He's already leaving." Richard tried to get up, but his legs felt shaky. "Amanda," he muttered, almost voiceless. She didn't answer. She just squeezed Lucas against her and went to the back of the store. Richard stood there, motionless, feeling the guilt crush him like a mountain. He tried to convince himself that it was for the best, that he had protected his family by kicking her out, that she was better off away from him. But then he looked at the counter and saw a picture frame with a photo of Amanda and Lucas smiling together, happy, like a complete family. And in that instant, Richard felt a terrible emptiness grow inside him, because for the first time in years he realized that he had lost something that no amount of money could buy. Amanda had moved on, without him. But the worst was yet to come, and Richard didn't yet know that his past was about to take its toll on him in the most painful way possible. Richard arrived home with a heavy chest, as if a ton of concrete were crushing his lungs. His head was spinning, and he could hardly remember how he had gotten there. All he could see were Amanda's eyes, the icy, steely gaze of the daughter he had disowned, a daughter who now looked at him as if he were a stranger. As soon as he entered the mansion, he dropped the bag with the cake on the living room table and collapsed into the velvet armchair that had been his private throne for years. But now there was no comfort there. The pride that had always sustained him seemed to have evaporated. He put his hands to his face and tried to hold back the tears that threatened to escape. "Richard," Evelyn's hesitant voice echoed through the room. He raised his head and saw his wife standing in the doorway, her face worried. Evelyn hadn't seen her husband like this for years. He had always been tough, unyielding, cold as a rock. But now, in front of her, he seemed broken. Richard began, but his voice failed him. He swallowed, and for the first time in a long time, he couldn't pretend to be in control. "I saw her." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Amanda," she murmured, moving closer. Richard just nodded, and as if he finally couldn't take it anymore, he collapsed. The man who had always prided himself on his rigidity and power began to cry like a child, his shoulders shaking and sobs escaping his throat. Evelyn knelt down beside him, and for the first time in many years hugged her husband. "What happened?" she asked, her voice breaking. Between tears and slurred words, Richard told her everything. He talked about the bakery, how he had seen Amanda strong and sure, and how Lucas, the sweet, polite boy, had refused his money with a firmness that made his heart sink. He's my grandson, Evelyn," said Richard, his voice breaking, "and he doesn't even know who I am." Evelyn, who had always dreamed of that moment, couldn't hold back the tears. For years she had lived with a divided heart, one part grieving for her daughter who had been expelled, and the other chained to her overbearing husband who would never admit a mistake. Now, seeing Richard like this, destroyed by guilt, was both sad and desperate. "You have to fix this," whispered Evelyn. "I don't know how," he replied in a weak voice. "I threw our daughter out onto the street. I left her alone, pregnant, and now she's out there, winning without needing me." "But she's still your daughter," said Evelyn, holding her husband's face with trembling hands. "If there's a chance, you have to try." He spent the rest of the day restless and not knowing what to do. The next morning, Richard took courage. His heart squeezed, he went back to Sweet Dreams Bakery. He walked through the door ready to do what he had never imagined he would do, ask for forgiveness. Amanda was behind the counter, organizing a tray of cupcakes. When she saw her father walk in, her body stiffened, and her fingers tightened on the spatula she was holding. "What are you doing here?" she asked dryly. "Amanda," he mumbled, trying to pull himself together. "I just wanted to talk. We have nothing to talk about." "Please," Richard insisted. Just listen to me." Amanda left the spatula on the table and crossed her arms. "You have 2 minutes." Richard took a deep breath and felt the words catch in his throat. How can he explain years of absence and cruelty in just 2 minutes? "I know I made a mistake," he began, his voice heavy. "I know I was harsh and unfair." Amanda laughed bitterly. "Unfair," she interrupted. "You threw me out on the street, pregnant, without even caring if I was going to survive. That's a lot more than unfair, Dad." "I was angry," tried to justify Richard. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting?" Amanda took a step forward, her eyes shining with pain. "Abandoning me was your way of protecting me?" Richard lowered his head, swallowing. "I know I can't erase what I've done," he muttered. "But if you let me help you now, maybe I can fix something." He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the counter. "Here's enough money for you to expand this bakery, or move house if you like. You can use it however you like." Amanda looked at the envelope and felt a lump form in her throat. For a moment, a whirlwind of memories flooded her mind. The hungry days, the cold nights, the times she had to choose between feeding herself or feeding Lucas. Money could have changed so much back then. It could have relieved so much suffering. But now was different. She pushed the envelope back to him. "I don't need this." Richard looked up, surprised. "Amanda, please." "I've fought for every single thing I've achieved," she said firmly. "Every customer who walks through that door, every penny I earn, was earned with hard work and dignity. I didn't need your fortune to get here, and I don't need it now." "But I don't want your money," Amanda cut in. "If you think you can buy my forgiveness, you're wrong." Richard was silent, feeling a pain he had never known before. A pain that didn't come from the loss of money or failed businesses, but from the rejection of a daughter he realized too late that he should never have abandoned. "So, what can I do?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Amanda stared at him for a moment, as if she wanted to believe that there was sincerity in that voice. "I don't know if there's anything you can do," she replied, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Richard nodded slowly, feeling the tears build up again. "I just want you to know that I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry." Without waiting for an answer, Richard took the envelope and left the bakery, feeling even emptier than when he had entered. On the other side of the counter, Amanda remained motionless, her breathing fast and her chest tight. When she finally managed to move, she sat down on a chair and put her hands to her face. The tears that flowed were not just of anger or pain. They were of doubt, because, despite everything, a part of her wanted to believe that the man who had once been her father could still change, and it was this uncertainty that made her even more uneasy. Because deep down, Amanda knew that fate hadn't finished writing this story. The afternoon at Sweet Dreams Bakery was peaceful. The sweet scent of freshly baked cake wafted through the air, and the soft sound of customers chatting filled the room. Amanda tried to concentrate on her work, but her mind was still stuck on what had happened hours before, Richard's unexpected visit and his words choked with regret. Sitting next to Amanda, Margaret noticed the young woman's distant gaze and approached with her calm, welcoming manner. "Darling, are you all right?" Margaret asked, her voice as soft as ever. Amanda tried to smile but couldn't. The knot in her chest was still there. "I don't know what to think, Margaret," she murmured. "After everything he's done, now he shows up here thinking that an envelope full of money can fix everything?" Margaret didn't reply immediately. Instead, she reached out and gently held Amanda's hand. "I know it hurts," said Margaret, "but sometimes people can only ask for forgiveness in the way they've learned to do. And in your father's case, that was the only way he knew all his life." "I can't just forget what he did," Amanda retorted, feeling her chest tighten. "He turned his back on me when I needed him most." Margaret nodded sympathetically. "And you have every right to feel that way, but you know what I think? Maybe you're just what he needs right now." Amanda stared at her in surprise. "How can you be like that, Margaret?" she asked, her voice wavering. "You took me in when I had nothing. You shared what little you had with me, and now you're saying that I should forgive the man who threw me out onto the street." Margaret smiled sweetly. "I'm not telling you to forget," she said wistfully, "but carrying that anger inside you will only hurt you more. And I know your heart, Amanda. I know it's good." Amanda lowered her eyes, feeling the tears welling up. How could Margaret be so generous, so pure? That woman, who could barely support herself at the time, had given her a home, offered her love, and now insisted that she open her heart to a man who had hurt her so much. In the days that followed, Richard didn't give up. Every morning he would appear on the sidewalk in front of the bakery, sometimes alone, sometimes with Evelyn by his side. He never had the courage to go in. He just stood there looking in the window, hoping that Amanda would at least glance back at him. He sent her flowers almost every day, always accompanied by cards with simple but sincere messages. "I'm sorry. I just want to talk. Let me try to be a part of your life." Amanda read each message, but her response was always the same: silence. "He won't give up, Amanda," said Evelyn, whenever she found a moment to go into the bakery and talk to her daughter. "He's changed. I can see it in his eyes." "He's only doing this because he feels guilty," Amanda replied, hardened. "That doesn't change what he did." "Maybe it won't change what he's done," Margaret intervened, always thoughtful, "but it might change what he can still do." As much as Evelyn and Margaret insisted, Amanda couldn't open her heart. The pain she had felt for all those years was still too strong. Then, one unexpected afternoon, fate decided to act. Amanda was at the back of the bakery chatting with Evelyn and Margaret when Lucas rushed in. "Mom," he called out, "I'm going to deliver that cake to the store around the corner, okay?" "Okay, honey," replied Amanda. "Just be careful crossing the street." Lucas took the box with the cake and hurried off, excited about the task. Outside, Richard stood on the other side of the sidewalk, as he did every day. He was watching the bakery, lost in his own thoughts, when he saw Lucas walk out of the door. The boy was distracted, concentrating on balancing the box in his hands. Without realizing it, he started to cross the street, without looking sideways. It was at that moment that Richard saw the car coming quickly down the avenue. "Lucas!" shouted Richard, his voice desperate and powerful. Lucas, startled, turned in the direction of the shout, but didn't see the approaching car. Without a second thought, Richard ran into the street as if his life depended on it. He jumped up and managed to grab Lucas by the arm, pulling him out of the way at the last second. The driver of the car braked sharply, but Richard didn't have time to get away. His body was hit by the rearview mirror, throwing him violently to the ground. Amanda, Evelyn, and Margaret heard the noise and ran out of the bakery. "Lucas!" screamed Amanda in despair. Lucas was lying on the sidewalk, frightened but not seriously injured. "Mom, Tunt," he cried, "you saved me, but he's hurt." Amanda looked down at the pavement and saw Richard lying motionless on the ground with a deep cut on his forehead. "No," mumbled Amanda, terrified. "No." The driver, dazed and still shaking, got out of the car. He saved the boy," said the boy. "I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't run." Is he alive?" asked Evelyn, kneeling beside her husband, who was barely breathing. "Call an ambulance," shouted Amanda, with tears streaming down her face. Margaret pulled Lucas into her arms, protecting him from the surrounding despair. The ambulance arrived minutes later. Richard was rushed to hospital, still unconscious. Amanda stood on the sidewalk in shock. The man she had rejected over the last few days, the same man who had once thrown her out of the house, had risked his life to save Lucas. And now, she didn't know if she'd still have time to tell him what her heart, however bruised, so desperately needed to express. The hours following the accident were agonizing. Amanda, Evelyn, Margaret, and Lucas sat in the hospital waiting room, immersed in a heavy silence. Time seemed to drag on cruelly, as if every minute lasted an eternity. Lucas was curled up in Margaret's arms, still trembling. From time to time, Amanda ran her hand through her son's hair, trying to calm him down, but in truth, she herself was on the verge of despair. "Is he going to be okay, Mom?" Lucas asked, his voice weak and his eyes shining with worry. Amanda swallowed, not knowing what to say. "I don't know, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. She had never imagined that, after so long denying her father's presence in her life, she would be there now, grieving and desperate for him to get well. "He saved my life. I need to talk to him and thank him," Lucas murmured softly. Her son's words squeezed Amanda's heart even more. He pulled me out so quickly, and he hurt himself to protect me. Evelyn, who had remained silent until then, couldn't hold back her tears any longer and wept softly. Amanda looked at her mother and for the first time saw not just the submissive woman who had lived for years in Richard's shadow, but a mother who loved intensely, who had suffered silently, but who had never stopped fighting for her daughter. I don't want him to go," whispered Evelyn, her voice broken. Amanda felt her eyes fill with tears. She never thought she'd see the day when she'd hear her mother say that, and at that moment she realized that she felt the same way. Just then the door to the operating room opened, and a doctor emerged, still wearing blood-stained gloves and apron. "Are you related to Richard Williams?" Amanda jumped to her feet. Yes, it's me. I'm his daughter," she said, her voice trembling. The doctor sighed deeply. He was lucky. The blow to the head was strong, and he lost a lot of blood, but we managed to stabilize him. He's still unconscious, but he'll recover soon. Amanda collapsed in her chair, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God," whispered Evelyn, bringing her hand to her chest. "Can I see him?" Amanda asked. "He needs to rest, but he can come in for a few minutes," replied the doctor. Amanda hesitated for a moment, but felt Margaret's hand gently touch her shoulder. "Go on, my dear," said Margaret in her always welcoming tone. "He needs you now." Amanda walked through the hospital corridors, her heart racing. When she entered the room, she saw her father lying in bed, hooked up to wires and machines that monitored his vital signs. He looked so different, so fragile. The strong, imposing man who had once thrown her out of the house now lay there, motionless and vulnerable. She approached him slowly and hesitantly touched his hand. To her surprise, Richard's fingers moved slightly. "Dad," murmured Amanda, her voice breaking. "It's me, Amanda." His eyes opened slowly. Richard blinked a few times, looking confused, until his eyes settled on his daughter's face. "Amanda," he whispered with difficulty. "Shh, don't speak now," Amanda asked, trying to hold back her tears. "Just rest." "Lucas, is he all right?" Richard asked, his voice weak. "He's fine, thanks to you," Amanda replied with a shaky smile. Richard closed his eyes for a moment and let out a deep sigh. "I didn't think I was going to make it," he murmured. Amanda couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. Richard slowly turned his face to look at her. "I don't want you to thank me," he said, his voice almost fading. I just wish I'd been a better father to you." Amanda put her hand to her face and cried. Years of hurt, pain, and pride collapsed in that instant. "I don't know if I can forget everything," Amanda confessed, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to live with anger anymore." Richard weakly squeezed his daughter's hand. "I love you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've always loved you. I've just been too proud to admit it." Amanda, unable to hold back her emotion, lowered her head onto her father's chest and cried like a child. "I love you too, Dad." Unbeknownst to them, Evelyn, Margaret, and Lucas were watching the scene from the bedroom door. Evelyn squeezed Margaret's hand gratefully, while Lucas smiled with emotion. Without saying anything, Margaret put her arm around Evelyn's shoulders and whispered, "It seems that time has finally done what only time can do: heal." The months that followed brought a new beginning for everyone. Richard, after weeks of recovery, made a point of being present in Amanda and Lucas's lives. He visited the bakery every day, but now not just to ask for forgiveness, but to help in any way he could. He became a friend to the customers, a truly devoted grandfather to Lucas and a lighter, less embittered man. Lucas, proud of the grandfather who was now part of his life, would spend hours by Richard's side, listening to his stories and learning from him. One sunny afternoon, Richard showed up with a brand new bicycle for Lucas. "I never learned to ride," Lucas confessed, looking unsure. "Then today you'll learn," said Richard, smiling. Patiently, he held on tightly to the bike seat, while Lucas tried to balance himself. "I'm going to fall," muttered the boy, unsure. "And if you fall, I'll be here to hold you up," replied Richard. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling courageous when he heard those words. When he finally pedaled off on his own, laughing and shouting with joy, Amanda, Evelyn, and Margaret, who were watching from the balcony, couldn't hold back their tears. Amanda looked at Margaret and gratefully shook her hand. "I don't know how I would have managed without you," said Amanda. "You've always been strong," Margaret replied with a fond smile. "You just needed to remember that." Amanda looked at Lucas pedaling down the street, with Richard right behind him, smiling as if he had regained a part of himself that he had lost a long time ago. In that instant, Amanda understood that life had taught her a hard but valuable lesson. True love is that which resists time, pain, and pride. And above all, she realized that forgiveness wasn't just a gift for her father, it was liberation for herself. There, under the blue sky and Lucas's laughter echoing down the street, Amanda felt her heart finally find peace. And that was the touching story of love, forgiveness, and overcoming that showed us that even after years of hurt and suffering, true love can heal the deepest wounds. What did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. Were you moved by this story of reunion and redemption? Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you can continue to follow touching stories full of emotion. Your support is very important so that we can continue to bring you content that inspires and moves.